Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes, I see the bows. Let's see, can I see you guys instead of me? Kind of. Well, good to see you all on the Zendo. And for those of you online on YouTube, I can't see you, but thank you for joining us tonight in the Cloud Zendo. I'm just back from a trip of a couple weeks in Minnesota, and we had a wonderful time, my wife and I, with our new baby, visiting friends and family, many of whom hadn't seen her before. So that was a sweet moment of connection. And then just driving back from the Albuquerque airport, as probably all of you know who are in the Zendo, you get on these long stretches of this vast expanses and these clouds, the monsoon clouds that are just huge. I mean, they're like probably, tens of miles across. And it's just kind of breathtaking and reminded me of why it's called the land of enchantment. So I was really happy to be back and really gonna kind of get into the Zendo and sit, and was working on my talk last night, and then I started to feel a little funny. And I was like, what is that? And it's like, I feel a little lightheaded or a little cold, even though it's 75 in the house. And by the time I went to bed, I was really kind of chilled. And I just thought, oh, this isn't good. So I kind of tossed and turned through the night. And finally at like 4 a.m., I had like a tummy upset basically. And I wasn't sure what it was. Was it something I ate? Am I getting the stomach flu? Is it COVID? I don't know. I had just gotten a test the day before and was negative, so a PCR test. So I thought probably not COVID, but maybe something I ate. But shoot, I can't go to the Zendo. I can't go to Upaya. And what am I going to do about this talk? So I was kind of dreaming and like wakefully dreaming and thinking, trying to think my way out of it. Who could give the talk? I bet he's been working on a talk. He could probably give it on 10 hours notice. And I thought, no, he's not going to do it. How about Wendy? It was supposed to be her talk anyway. No, she's not going to do it. How about Roshi? She's up in the mountains. No, she's too busy. Okay, I got to do something. So that's all just to say, I apologize in advance for this talk. And I see. Okay, I guess I have to go to speaker view for YouTube. I'll try to bumble my way through it and apologize in advance, but thank you for your patience. And I'm just glad to be here with you. Anyway, I actually thought about that. I was like, I could just die tonight, you just never know. So I'm glad to be here. So today I'm thinking of lineage, and I'm thinking of transmission and the various forms of transmission, mostly Dharma transmission. But in thinking about lineage and connection with our ancestors, of course, I think of my mother, who actually turns 60 tomorrow. So happy birthday, Mom. And I think of Skyla, who is 8 months old yesterday. And that those two are like speaking to each other in a way through me, and that I've learned so much already from Skyla about communication and transmission and wordless communication, of course. A lot of baba wawa and cooing, and then occasional words. I'm trying to see if I can get her first word to be ta ta ta, which is suchness. She's got at least 2 of those syllables already, ta ta, but we'll get there soon, I think. And then just knowing or connecting how my mom was with me all those years that I couldn't talk and I don't really remember, but Roshi often reminds me of a picture I showed her of myself when I was a baby and my mom, and she said, that explains everything about you. I was like, what do you mean? And she's, it's just pure joy. She's like tickling me or something. And it was just that the connection we have with our parents, especially, or our loved ones, informs how we are in life. And I'm sure that was a big part of it. So thank you, Mom, for tickling me. And And of course, my dad, who I think is on here too, who spent a lot of time with me also as a baby, doing little dances and making up songs. And all of my bad dad jokes I have to blame on his certain kind of humor. So thank you, Dad. And then, speaking of birthdays, Roshi Jones' 80th birthday is coming up, July 30th. And it's a big year in many ways. I mean, it's just a number, of course, but it's a kind of milestone. You can no longer deny that you are venerable and august. And so we're going to celebrate you, Roshi. And she's up there now in her mountain fastness, hopefully watching on YouTube if the transmission is working. And just to let you all know who are on YouTube, we'll be live streaming part of the birthday party. For those of you who aren't there in person, we're just having a few people, family and friends, in the Zendo with masks on and, all the protocols. But we want to celebrate Roshi with our wider community. So it'll be on the same YouTube live stream link at around 5 p.m. on July 30th. So please join us there. We're gonna have a slideshow, of course, and some words for Roshi and from Roshi, and a beautiful calligraphy presentation, demonstration by Kaz Tanahashi Sensei, who will be there. So just thinking of you, Roshi, and how you got me into this. And so this is about transmission because, well, of course, transmission is kind of, how do you put it? Dharma transmission or Dharma teaching, or the communication of what we are and who we are, our warm hand to warm hand connection is the whole of the holy life, as the Buddha said, this spiritual friendship. And so I wanted to speak to that, and also because we're in this process. My Dharma brother Kozan and I are in the process of Dharma transmission with Roshi. And so there's a lot that goes into that. That's part of the ceremony and part of the ritual, copying of texts, working on certain koans, and just meeting regularly with our teacher and kind of going over things. And in, kind of characteristic life fashion, it's also been a kind of a jumble in finding out which texts go where and what goes where. There's no kind of hard and fast, like this is the Bible of, the things that you have to copy. And because everybody, it's kind of like, here's what I want to transmit to you. And a lot of it came from the ancestors and some of it came from me. And, it's kind of all in the mix. And so it's been a really wonderful and deepening practice to sit with Roshi and work through these documents. And so people ask, well, what is Dharma transmission? What does that mean? And what are you doing exactly? And of course, there's the ceremony itself, which has these kind of elements. And then there's the greater question of what is Dharma, what is transmitted, what is Dharma even? And so I thought I would go through, as I do, and look at some of the terms and the definitions and etymologies of these words that we're using, Dharma and transmission and communication and information, and look at some interesting correlates in modern science for transmission and information, and then see what our ancestors have to say in our lineage, specifically from Keizan's Denkoroku, The Transmission of Light, which is the book on transmission in a way. And so we thought we'd just explore a little bit with you tonight on those topics. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I was just thinking of Roshi up there, just speaking of transmission and communication and information, how it's kind of a mystery, right? What is Dharma transmission? But if you think about what's happening now, where I'm here in my home and it's going into this and it's going through a satellite and beaming over to there, and then it's going up into this new network of satellites that called Starlink that Roshi's on right now, I think. And it's just going all over the place and somehow getting to her so that she's witnessing me just pretty much after what I'm saying, which is just talk about transmission. So there's magic and mystery everywhere. So what is transmission? So just the definition. I mean, I asked my Aunt Linda, what do you think about transmission? She said, well, the first thing I think of is a car transmission. And I said, yeah, me too, actually. If you think about it, that's the word that comes up often. And so, of course, I don't know much about it, so I just looked it up. And transmission in a car is when it's transmitting the power from the engine to the wheels through the gears. And gears are kind of like the skillful means that effectively transmit the power in the right way and the right quantity so that you can get movement. So that's a cool kind of transmission. But transmission in general is just when something is conveyed or communicated. It goes from one place to another. And when we're talking about transmission, we're usually talking about some kind of information, some kind of communication. And information is defined as knowledge that is communicated. And so you can either have two knowers, you need a knower for knowledge to be communicated. So two knowers, one that's communicating to the other, or you can have, you can just get the communication. I suppose you could call it communication from the world. Your experience of this moment is a communication. Perhaps you could call that the teaching of insentient beings, although Kazan has a different gloss on what insentient beings are. But the teachings of, the communications from the world, you just look at something and you look at the vast sky, and even in that, there's something there that can't quite be put into words either, that's touching. That touches me anyway. And so this transmission of a special kind of information, so Dharma, what is Dharma? And of course, Dharma can be talked about to the end of days, and there are many talks, but what maybe just for our purposes, we can go with the definition of it's the wisdom or insight that is ultimately liberating. It's the to know. So if you're informed, knowledge communicated. So the communication is the Dharma, that you know who you really are, what the world really is, which perhaps cannot even be put into words, and that knowing in and of itself is liberating, frees us from our suffering. And so the communication of the Dharma is its practice is to free of suffering, free ourselves and free others of suffering. But in and of itself, it's a kind of knowing. But as many Zen people would say, Zen ancestors, as soon as I start saying what Dharma is and isn't, you probably should cover your ears and walk out of the room, because I will be defiling them. So to come to kind of a famous quote of what this transmission is by Bodhidharma, you've probably heard this: a special transmission outside the scriptures, not founded upon words and letters, by pointing directly to one's mind, it lets one see into one's own true nature and thus attain Buddhahood. And so Bodhidharma supposedly said this, and different people questioned. Even Rujing said, when asked about, what about all the scriptures that were written? He said, well, in Buddha Dharma, there is no inside or outside. So when you speak about a special transmission outside the scriptures, what do you mean? And so you take that as you think, but I would think it just means that the outsideness of it is that it's not this direct, it's not like conceptual scriptures, it's not like the words that you can kind of figure it out. It's like it points to something. So whether it's a teacher pointing to you, or the vast sky, or the scriptures themselves, that they can point to something. They can make you look. And I think that's the important part. We'll see later. Does it make you look and try to see something? And in that trying to see, whether you see it or not, something happens. And so it's different than the transmission or communication of information that we normally think of, like this is this and this is that. It's a transmission of a way of looking or a way of knowing, perhaps. So is that what we're talking about when we're talking about Denbo or Dharma transmission? Yes and no. I mean, in that sense of like, am I receiving Dharma transmission from Roshi, like mind to mind? I would say that's not what the ceremony means. And yet it symbolizes the fact that we've been, with each other for over a decade, as teacher and student, walking at each other's side up at the refuge, up in the mountains of the Himalayas, and working, side by side on all kinds of really mundane things, you could say mundane, and that every moment that we're kind of in the world together serving is a moment of mind-to-mind transmission, of communication, of exemplifying how it is to live the Dharma in the world. And so I remember one time when Roshi was, she was like, can you write this thing? And I have to write this paragraph. Can you just write it? And I was like, okay, well, I'll try to write what you might write like. And she's like, and I wrote it, and she's like, that's it. That's what I would have written. And I was so happy. I was like, oh, great. There's the transmission, right? At least for that thing. And so maybe this is another point too, is that the Dharma that's transmitted isn't one thing. It's not like, oh, I've got this Dharma thing and you've now got it, right? There's no one thing. Dharma is vast and subtle. And so it's how you keep your office clean, or which I'm working on. It's how you show up on time. It's how you sit. It's how you treat people. It's so many things. How you consider the bigger picture, how you look forward ahead into the future and try to figure out what kinds of things you might have to face. And all of the while, with all of these concerns, how does it serve and how does it bring people onto the path and bring yourself onto the path? And so all of that, I feel, has been transmitted this whole time. And so this Denbo, this Dharma transmission, is a kind of recognition of our time together, and in a way is also just a beginning. It doesn't mean that the path is complete or ended by any means. Even in the traditional Soto sense, someone who's received Denbo could be a 20-year-old, priest's son, and then he's got his whole life ahead of him to learn and grow. So though it does give you the option to be called a teacher and to take the honorific sensei, that is, I think, it needs to be taken not lightly. That's not the word I'm looking for, but there's a huge range. There's like Sensei Kodo, who just became a sensei and he's 37, and then there's like Sensei whomever who's 75, has been practicing for 40 years and has way more wisdom, right? So just to say, it's not going to mean that I'm any different than I am right now. But I do appreciate and thank Roshi for her vote of confidence in me to continue walking this Dharma path. So Denbo, Den is that word transmission. Bo is or ho. They can be pronounced both ways in the Japanese, bo and ho, but it's the word that means Dharma. And so Den is really interesting. So Den can mean to pass on, to spread, to transmit, to infect. Dharma infection, to transfer, to circulate, to conduct. And transmission in English also has these meanings. So it's the passing on or the transmitting or the infection of Dharma. I've been infected with I'm Dharma positive. And so one thing that jumped out at me when I was reading that definition was conduction. And here's where we get geeky. So if you want to take a break and get some water, you're not interested in science, now's your chance. We'll come back to Kazan, I promise. But conducting. So I was thinking about electricity and how electricity is transmitted. I wasn't really sure, like what happens? I kind of know from school, it's like, okay, you put the wires on the battery and then electricity flows along the wire to the light bulb and it lights up, right? Or it flows through the filament, which causes the filament to glow and flows back to the battery. And so that's sort of true, but it's, as with many things, there's more nuance to it. So this is just bizarre. So electrons themselves, right? These little tiny, tiny particles that are zipping all around. If you have a wire that's not plugged into anything, there are electrons zipping around all over the place all the time anyway, but they're not moving in one direction or another because they're not connected to a battery or an electromagnetic field, which is what the battery creates. And so these electrons are actually moving pretty fast, like 100 million, anyway, really fast, 100 million miles an hour or 1,000,000 miles an hour, something like that. But they're moving in all different directions, so they don't do anything. So this movement is really just the expression of heat in the wire. And the hotter it is, the faster they're moving. Now, when you apply an electromagnetic field to that wire, for example, by plugging in a battery, then you think, okay, now all the electrons start moving. And they do start moving, but they don't move in a straight line. They still jump around all over the place, almost completely randomly, but they have a subtle push in that direction. And so while an electron by itself is moving very fast, the rate at which it moves along a line is about a meter, a meter an hour, like a snail, very slowly. But it's not going like slowly, it's going like this, right? Very slowly. And so when you flip the light switch, the electrons that are, say, at the battery are not going to get to the light for many hours, but the light instantly turns on. How is that? So it's not that the electrons that are in the battery are going to the light and turning it on. It's that they're pushing the electrons, that the whole wire starts flowing like this, though. It's like flowing all over the place. And so the electrons that are close to the light bulb already get pushed towards it and light it up. And so the signal actually, so there are three different speeds. There's the speed the electron's moving, say like 100 million miles an hour. And then there's the drift, the electric drift, which is the overall speed of the electron, the average speed of electrons through the wire, which is really slow, like a meter an hour. And then there's the speed of the impulse from the switch to the light. And the impulse is actually almost at the speed of light, like 100 trillion miles an hour, something like that. And that's because the electrons, while they don't move, they're pushing each other, right? And that push, when one pushes the other, is actually done through a field. And the field can move more quickly. The field moves as electromagnetic fields do at the speed of light, because light is an electromagnetic field. Of course, it depends on the medium that they're in, but pretty close to light speed. So what does that have to do with Dharma transmission? Well, it's actually related to candles and lamps. And so when we talk about the Denkoroku, which is Keizan's book, Transmission of Light, is literally light transmission record. It's speaking to this phrase, Dharma lamp or Hoto, which is a metaphorical expression that likens the Dharma to a flame, which can be passed to another lamp from master to disciple, and thus be kept burning forever. And so what is the nature of one flame being passed, or for the flame on one candle, let's say, to be passed to another? And I like this example too, because it's Dharma transmission is one way that it applies, and it also applies with, just as an aside, John Donne has talked about in a kind of a more nuanced version of a reincarnation. It's not like the candle is reborn, it's the same candle, it's like the light is transferred. Well, then what is really transferred? So to take this theory of kind of electromagnetic transmission a little bit, we're talking about conduction. So conduction can be in terms of electricity, but it can also be in terms of heat, right? So the heat travels through things. So what do you need for flame on a light? You need to have a combustible material, and you need to get it to the right temperature so that it enters into a self-perpetuating state of ignition, of exothermic reaction, chemical reaction. So you start the flame, and then the flame keeps itself going, breaking apart the atoms of oil and turning them into carbon and combining with oxygen. That's what it is. It's breaking apart and combining. Anyway, I obviously don't understand chemistry that well, but enough to know that this combination of oxygen and carbon that creates CO2 also creates heat. And that heat enables the breaking of the bonds to keep going and the joining of the bonds. And so when you have one candle that's already lit, it's its own kind of self-perpetuating thing. So what is actually transferred when you touch one candle to the other? What is that? And if that's what is likened to Dharma transmission, maybe we can learn something about transmission there. And so, not much actually, right? It's the candle, the unlit candle already had to have the potential for awakening, right? It already had to have flame nature. It had the ability to burst into flame if it got hot enough. And that could be from another candle, it could be from a magnifying glass, it could be from an electric spark, it could be just because the room turns to 500 degrees, which is, then the candle would melt, but presumably that would, cause it to light up. So anything that had sufficient heat could light it up, but it wouldn't by itself in normal conditions. And so there's the metaphor of, well, what did you take to become a combustible candle, right? And there's the discipline, there's the practice. You do not practice to become a Buddha, and yet, it makes you Buddha prone to practice, right? What is the quote, Roshi? If enlightenment is an accident, but practice makes you accident prone. So practice makes your candle ignition prone. And so, all of these stories in the Denkaroku are these moments when, well, not all actually, but many are when the master says or does something that lights up the student and they get enlightened, right? And so what's transmitted perhaps is just that enough energy impulse to light up their flame, their knowledge of who they are. In some of the cases though, including the first, it's not the master that does it, it's something else. So like the master might say something, and then one student went on top of a mountain, and then they got greatly enlightened. And I was like, oh, interesting. So it could take time. Maybe there's a slow burn. And in other cases, it wasn't even, it wasn't the master at all, but something else. And the master just confirms and says, oh, you got enlightened by, something else, the electric spark, and that recognition. So there's Dharma transmission, and then there's a kind of recognition. And so this recognition, which is maybe a better way to think about it. I mean, transmission in the way I'm talking about it, I think makes sense, but not in the sense of something is given. Like you don't give somebody awakening, right? That doesn't happen. The transmission is more like a recognition. And let's see. Yeah. Oh, have you guys ever seen Magic Eye? This has just popped in my head as the kind of maybe another example of what this might be like. So Magic Eye are these, it's a pattern on a piece of paper or a screen. And it looks like just a kind of mess of colors and little tiny shapes and stuff, just it doesn't look like anything. But the way that the shapes are laid out are such that if you focus beyond the page, they come together and form a three-dimensional image. And it's really interesting because you're kind of staring at it and you're trying to you have to find the right focal point. And you can't really be told, well, this is the focal point is 15 centimeters beyond the page. Like you have to just be told, okay, look through the page, right? And you see the things coming together. And then once they stop, you have to stop focusing because they're moving when you're focusing, when the focus of your eyes is moving. And they stop when the focus of your eyes stops. So once they lock, you stop moving the eyes, and then there it is. There's an image. It could be a dinosaur, it could be a star, it could be anything, but it's unmistakable and it's super clear. And if you've never seen a magic eye, check it out. I lost vision in my left eye, and one of the first things I thought is like, I can't do magic eyes anymore. I was really sad because it's an incredible miracle. So check out magic eyes. But if you think about a teacher and a student who are like a teacher who's trying to show a student, how do you do a magic eye? You imagine what they say to them. You can't tell somebody how to do it. You can tell somebody how to approach it, and they have to figure it out for themselves. But when it locks and the student says, oh, I see a star. And then the teacher says, yes. And what else do you see? Oh, and behind the star, there's clouds and there's dinosaurs and there's, a cave and, there's all kinds of stuff in the picture. And then, so that's, the teacher checking, like, are you seeing clearly? And then once the teacher is confident that, okay, they've seen everything that I've seen, right? That's the transmission. And so what was transmitted? A kind of recognition of knowing. You saw what I saw. We see eye to eye. And that's I think, a useful way of thinking of transmission. So a couple other words that are usually part of this. So denkai. So there's denbo and denkai. So denbo is Dharma transmission, which is what enables you to wear this mokuran, the color of silence, gold or brown robe, and be a sensei, and you're authorized to teach. And denkai is transmission of the precepts. And that's when you become a full priest. So right now I'm still a novice priest in training, in unsui, as the word is in Japanese, cloud water, which I love. I'm a cloud water wanderer. And in a denkai, you become a full priest, and you can give ordinations, do jukai. It's a kind of, you've fully entered into your vocation of holding the role of the master of ceremonies. So your role is to provide a structure, a container for people to have rites of passage, to have ceremony in any walk of life or in any part of their life, whether it's weddings and funerals and baby blessings, to sesshin and the great ceremony of bearing witness to the nature of your own mind, which I love when Kozan talks about that as the sesshin is a ceremony. It's not something where you're trying to get something. Ceremony is not about getting something. It's about remembering why we're here, remembering our vows, and using this special container to really add the energy that we need to light us up. And so Dharma itself doesn't care if you're a priest or not a priest. It's really one of the skillful means, I think. It's if you're called to it, to lend a helping hand to those who wish to enter into ceremony. So that's the denkai part. In our tradition, denbo and denkai often go together if you're a priest. And if you're not a priest, you would just get denbo. And then shiho is usually synonymous with denbo and or denkai. And that, again, is Dharma transmission, or more literally Dharma inheritance. And so the shi is succession or inheritance. And that's kind of back to this family or familial metaphor of handing, the inheritance of your wisdom or knowing to your heir. They call them Dharma heirs, right? You're an heir to the inheritance of what it is. And so shiho, that's what that means. So we finally come to Denkuroku, which is the record of the transmission of light. And some of these people were priests, some were just lay people. But whatever the case, this was the stories of how they came to realization and how they then passed on that realization or that recognition to the next person, all the way from Buddha Shakyamuni to actually not to Keizan. Keizan wrote it, but his teacher's teacher was the last person, so the Dogen's successor. And the first, I forget how many, it's like 24 ancestors are the Indian ancestors before Bodhidharma. And their stories are wonderful and fantastical and magical in a way. And then you get to the Chinese answers; they're a little bit more kind of like the koans as you usually hear them. And it all starts with, well, it doesn't all start actually. The first koan in Denkaroku is the Buddha looked up and saw the morning star and said, "I and all beings are simultaneously awakened. I and all beings simultaneously realize the way." And so that transmission is that, the first one of, it wasn't one person to another, it was the whole world to the Buddha, because he was the first in this eon. But after him, the second one, which I'll read, so we call the first patriarch Mahakashyapa rather than the Buddha. So the first patriarch was Mahakashyapa. Once the world honored one held up a flower and blinked. Mahakashyapa smiled. The world honored one said, "I have the treasury of the true Dharma, the wondrous mind of nirvana, and I transmit it to Mahakashyapa." And in a way, Zen was born in that moment. And who knows if that really happened or not, but it's kind of the prototypical example of the transmission outside of words and letters. The Buddha held up a flower. And what is it? Was it the Buddha that raised his eyebrows? So the eyebrows doesn't happen in every single one. Okay, not this one. So this one just says he held up a flower and blinked. And then Mahakashyapa broke into a smile. And so you could say, I could imagine Mahakashyapa recognized what the Buddha was just transmitting through his non-conceptual being, holding up a flower and just being there. And the Buddha recognized Mahakashyapa's recognition. And so that mutual recognition constituted the first transmission of light. Kind of have a lot to go through. What should I skip? Maybe we shouldn't have spent so much time on electric induction. My apologies. I'm going to give a talk in 2 weeks so we can return to some of these themes. Specifically, that talk will be on Daiji, the great matter. What is the great matter of life and death, and why is it important? And so we'll return to the Denkaroku and look at some of those. But I better read this from the case 49 of Patriarch Shredo Jirjian. So he quotes Jiangqing here. The 28 generations of Indian ancestors spoke of transmitting mind, not of transmitting words. Great Master Yunmen said, if this matter existed beyond words, wouldn't the 12-part canon of the 3 vehicles be wordless? Why do we speak of a special transmission outside the scriptures? Keizan answers, if you proceed by using intellectual understanding, then even though your preaching of the Dharma is like clouds and rain in its abundance, you will be criticized for seeing essential nature as if through thin silk. You should realize as a result of this that all discriminating minds are as apart from it as heaven and earth. And I love these kind of scoldings of the masters of like, if you think that you can talk about this stuff and use words and concepts to figure it out, then I like what he says. It's like viewing it through thin silk. It's not that you see nothing, right? It's not like you're completely, you might be as far apart from heaven and earth, but it's not that it's completely absent from your experience, but you're seeing it through silk. You're not seeing it directly, clearly. You're not being it. And so, again and again, it's not that we throw out these scriptures or throw out the study or discussion, but that we always remember that the point of it is not to figure out, the words and concepts and to be like, oh, here's the definition of transmission. Good, got that. Next thing. What's the great matter? It's like, this is what we can do in our practice. And so often we're sitting on a cushion like, am I really just watching my breath again? It's like, yes, and there's something else going on. And this is why it's important to have our, the holistic structure of residency is you're practicing, you're doing samu, and you're studying. and you're going to talks and you're reading, and these things are in your consciousness percolating, and you're sitting there and you're just watching your breath, and then that phrase might come up, like seeing the Dharma through thin silk. What would it be to see it directly? And you don't answer the question, you just ask it, and you sit there and you watch and you listen. And what is this thing, this clarity that Keizan's talking about all the time, this brightness that is a non-empty emptiness? What is this? And this is how we can use, these texts to really illuminate our practice and get the transmission of the ancestors directly. Oh, well, I think I better just close and skip to the end. And just on this note of practicing, Keizan exhorts us. He says, practitioners, well, he says monks, but practitioners, do not yearn for the antiquity of 2,000 years ago. If you just urgently practice the way today, Kashyapa has not yet entered Mount Kukutapada, but can appear here and now. Shakyamuni's fleshly body will be warm right now, and Kashyapa's smile will be new again. Thank you all for your practice and for keeping the warmth at Upaya and in the world. And I hope to see you again soon. We'll end with the 4 vows.